Could a small airplane really stay in the sky for 64 days without landing? And more importantly, could the pilots actually survive it? In 1958, Warren Bill Bailey, the owner of Las Vegas's Hacienda Hotel, wanted a publicity stunt that would get people talking across America. Former military pilot Robert Tim came up with an extraordinary idea: keep a small airplane airborne long enough to break the existing endurance record. The aircraft they chose was a Cessna 172, which was heavily modified for the attempt. Unnecessary equipment was removed, additional fuel capacity was added, and the cabin was adapted so two pilots could live inside the tiny aircraft for weeks. But there was one huge problem. How do you keep an airplane fueled if it can never land? The answer was one of the most dangerous parts of the entire mission: mid-air refueling from a moving truck. About every 12 hours, the Cessna would descend to very low altitude while a fuel truck drove underneath it. A line was lowered from the aircraft, the ground crew connected a fuel hose, and the hose was pulled back up to the airplane. The truck and the aircraft had to maintain almost exactly the same speed and direction. One small mistake could have ended the flight. After several test flights and preparations, Robert Tim and John Wayne Cook finally began the record attempt on December 4th, 1958. The Cessna took off from Las Vegas, and this time there was no plan to land anytime soon. At first, everything went according to plan, but as the days turned into weeks, the real challenge began. Inside the tiny Cessna, the two pilots had almost no room to move. They had to take turns flying, resting and sleeping while the engine continued running around the clock. The constant noise, vibration, cold and exhaustion slowly began to take their toll. Then came one of the most frightening moments of the entire flight. Around the 36th day, Robert Tim fell asleep while he was supposed to be flying. The aircraft was equipped with an autopilot, but it could only help maintain the aircraft's course. It could not see mountains, obstacles, or changing terrain. When Tim woke up, the Cessna was dangerously low and approaching a canyon. For a few moments, the record was no longer the most important thing. They were simply trying to stay alive. And the problems kept coming. Around the 39th day, the generator failed, creating serious problems for systems including the radio and lights, and making night operations and refueling much more difficult. Other instruments also began to fail. The fuel gauge and tachometer became unreliable, while the engine was accumulating carbon deposits after running continuously for an extraordinary amount of time. At this point, the question was no longer, can they break the record? It was, can the airplane survive long enough to reach it? On January 23rd, 1959, Tim and Cook surpassed the previous endurance record of roughly 50 days, but they still didn't land. The aircraft was still flying, so they decided to keep going. Day 61, Day 62, Day 63, and finally, on February 7th, 1959, after an astonishing 64 days, 22 hours, 19 minutes, and 5 seconds in the air, Robert Tim and John Wayne Cook finally brought the Cessna 172 back to the runway. But there was still one final question. How could officials prove that the airplane had really stayed off the ground for all those 64 days? Before the flight, officials had marked the landing tires with white paint. After the landing, they inspected them. The white paint was still intact. The tires showed no evidence of having touched the runway during the record attempt. It was a simple but powerful way to verify that the aircraft had remained airborne. The little Cessna had stayed in the air for 64 days, 22 hours, 19 minutes and 5 seconds. 2 pilots, 1 small airplane, and nearly 65 days without landing. But perhaps the most frightening part of this story wasn't the record itself. It was that moment when one pilot fell asleep. because if his eyes had stayed closed for just a few minutes longer, this might not have become the story of an aviation record. It could have become the story of a disaster. And that is what makes the 64-day Hacienda flight one of the most unbelievable chapters in aviation history. If you enjoy real aviation stories like this, make sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel. I'll see you in the next video with another fascinating story.